Hi, it's Glenn McQueenie, and welcome to my 25-minute Success Series podcast. Today, we have our first repeat guest ever on
Wow.
the podcast, and that is the legend, the one and only Dean Jackson from beautiful Winter
Wow.
Haven, Florida. How are you, Dean?
Well, I'm amazed. The only repeat so far. That's awesome.
Well,
I,
the
I
last
can't wait to
time
hear
you
what I have to say.
That's right. Well, the last time you were on, you added so much value because you were talking about the profit activators and how people could
Hmm.
really use those different divisions of their business to really build a really massive business. And of course,
Hmm.
feedback whenever you podcast is always amazing. So I wanted to really just have you back on again, and I'm so grateful for the time that you're giving us.
Awesome. I'm excited. So, what are
Good.
we going to
So,
talk about?
well, I'm thinking today. I think one of the biggest challenges that most agents have is lead conversion.
Okay.
That whether it be, many of them are relying on internet leads right now. That's their new. They're like buying the leads. Uh, it was quite interesting. Brian Buffini just released this kind of CD about how to fight back against the takeover of the real estate industry. And he
Okay.
was talking about the research he was doing with Zillow and how Zillow sent, I think it was 24 million leads uh, to their Zillow preferred partners. So I guess you pay
Sure.
Zillow, is it $5,000 a month, and then or 60,000 a year, and then you kind of get their leads, and that resulted in 271,000 closed transactions, or 1.4 out of every 100 leads. And
Hmm.
I loved what Brian Buffini said. He said, we have to stop calling these things leads and start really naming them for what they are, which is inquiries. You know,
Yeah.
it's interesting when you
Well,
look
it's
at it,
really,
just inquiry.
it is. Yeah, definitely. And I think that there's so many inefficiencies in the way that data was probably collected and um, you know distilled, because I don't believe for a minute that only one out of 100 people that inquired on through Zillow about a property actually bought a property. I think that number is much higher. I would believe it that person ultimately that they bought with the person that it was referred to.
Hmm.
Um, that's probably the real thing, but it would be inconceivable that 1 out of 100 of the people who inquired bought, because there are lots of studies that show, and I've based all of my lead conversion things on the uh, idea that just over half of the people that inquire about anything will buy what it is they inquired about within 18 months.
Hmm.
So I think, and this ties into what we see all the time. I see it in Facebooks and forums, in groups, people saying, I tried Zillow for 3 months and I didn't get anything. Those leads are no good. They're tire kickers, right? Or
Hmm.
those that don't waste your money. But the reality is that when you look at what happens, where I got that study that I've based everything on is from a company that handles millions of inquiries across all kinds of different industries. And what they do is they have a research division along with it that they will follow up with a sample of people every 90 days and do what they call "Did you buy" surveys. So let's say, Glenn, you came to the home show and you inquired about faucets at the Kohler booth. Okay,
Hmm.
that this company would handle all of the distribution of the sales literature and all of that, all the stuff that you asked for, and then they would follow up with people every 90 days, a sampling, and say just one question. They'd say, "Glenn, you came to the home show and you inquired about faucets. Have you bought any faucets?" Not did you buy Kohler faucets or did you buy faucets from us? Just did you buy faucets? And they would determine that just over half of the people that inquired about faucets will buy faucets within 18 months.
Mm-hmm.
But only 15% of them will do it in the first 90 days.
Right.
So the offset there is that most people are too focused on the short term and making their evaluations on the short term without realizing that all the value is in the long term. So if you say that data is probably self-reported conversions of those leads with the agent that they were referred to, but I think if you inquired further, that if you looked at it over 18 months or 2 years, that way more of those people would have bought. So it's not that they're not buyers, it's that the agent is not doing a good job of nurturing that relationship with them.
Absolutely. And I think that's really what I got out of those numbers too. It's if, it almost reminds me of, 20 or 30 years ago when we were doing newspaper ads, right? And you do almost like the power of sale bungalow, 99,000, and you get 100 calls.
Yeah.
And you'd probably pick up 1 or 2 clients, right? Like it's kind of, I don't think it's changed much, but I think the real skill is, and I find this interesting because something like a Zillow or some of the other big lead aggregators, they're very adamant that they're not going to be going into the brokerage side. And I think I figured out why. And it's because that's where all the hard work is. Like it's one thing to spend money and generate a lead and get your coders and programmers and algorithms. It's all the hard work is from when you get the lead to when you convert it to someone and bring them all the way through the process and get paid on it.
Well, exactly, and that's the thing is that's what's going to save the real estate industry is that you can't digitize the last 100 feet of a real estate transaction. That's why nobody's been able to en masse disrupt the real estate industry, even though for 20 years people have been trying, right, thinking that real estate as an industry is this big fat sitting duck waiting to be disrupted. But you can't disrupt the last 100 feet, which is where it all happens. I just did a very interesting reflection, because you've been in real estate a very long time, like me. Next year will be 30 years for me. I got my license in 1988. And I was looking back, reflecting on this and thinking, there's so much that's changed in those 30 years. Like back then, state-of-the-art technology was the fax machine, that we had just gotten in the office. And it was the thermal fax machine with that roll of paper that when it came, you had to run to the photocopier to make the copies before the ink disappeared, And so think of all of the stuff that's changed over that 30 years. We had all the information. The only way that a consumer could get any information about what was on the market was they had to come to a real estate agent because we had the catalog, right? We had the MLS catalog that came out every 2 weeks. And there was the only options for the consumer were the newspaper or driving out to the town and looking, coming into a real estate office or going to open houses, all that stuff. Now, 30 years later, information about every property and the history of every property and virtual tours and all that stuff is available instantly to everybody on their iPhone. But has anything fundamentally changed? And by fundamentally, I mean, has that affected the things that really matter, the days on the market and the percentage of asking price that the houses get, right? The fundamental measurements. Looking for a comparison, I looked back at golf. And in 1990, the leading driver on the PGA Tour was 279 yards. In 2017, the leading driver is 336 yards. So an improvement of 57 yards, all driven by technology, right? In improvements in the golf club and the golf ball, that they drive the ball now 57 yards further than they did in 1990. But when you look at the thing that really matters, the scoring average, the leading scoring average has improved by less than 1/4 of one stroke.
Wow.
And that's the same reason, is that you can't digitize or technologize the last 100 feet of a golf hole. You have to be a skillful person who can get the ball on the green and navigate it into the hole. That's what the same thing with the real estate industry. The driving distance is you can instantly buy leads at a velocity that was unimaginable before, right? That you can get as many leads as you want. That's just getting them. Buying Zillow leads is like having a long drive in the middle of the fairway, but you still have to get it on the green, and you still have to put it in the hole, right? You still have to connect with them and get an appointment and find the house that they really want, and then negotiate an agreement with an equally irrational seller, you know?
Mm-hmm.
That's
so true, you know, and I defer to your seniority because I'll only be in for 29 years in January. So I'm going to defer to
Let me
your.
tell you a couple of things, kid. Yeah, this is how it really happens.
This is how it really worked. I love that analogy of the last 100 feet of a golf.
Yeah.
You know, playing golf, for those people who play golf, they know it's the same. And I love that about real estate, because this is the problem. And, you know, I keep telling agents, you know, there's always been this debate, you know, in our industry about, oh, it's the brand that matters and all that stuff. And I'm like, you know what?
Right.
The brand's not your security. Your skills are your security. And in a good market, maybe it's not as a highly skilled market, you know, because you get a big, you know, burst in, you know, an increased population of agents, and they're taking a little bit of market share. And markets move into a stable market or a shifting market. It's the people who have the high skills to be able to convert a lead from, whether it be online or their niche or from their farm or whatever, or a referral, are the people who win the game.
That's exactly right. And to realize that what's happening on a macro level is that the gestation period is longer. That people looking, because they've got access to everything and they can start that process earlier, the people might start looking and dreaming and shopping before they're ever ready, you know? I've shared with you that I just finished up a 4-year case study with Tony Kelsey in Scarborough. And this was on listings, on listing leads generation. And what we found, what was the most telling, we tracked everything from September of 2013 to September of 2017. And over that period of time, you know, he spent $50,000 on mailing postcards and newsletters to follow up with the people who had responded, but generated $543,000. So an 11 times ROI on that. Now, here's what was really fascinating, was that we tracked back how long it had been since somebody had responded before they listed and sold their house. So he mailed from September to February before he closed his first transaction. But what happened was, when we look over the 4-year period now, going back to people who responded in the first year, there were 21 people who responded in that first year that sold their house in that 4 years. Some of them 3.5 years later.
Wow.
So most agents would have given up in the first 90 days, right? They would have maybe mailed for 3 or 4 months and said, oh, this doesn't work, and given up. But the
Dean.
long game is where it all happens, right? The long game is where you get that the conversion. You're building an asset. It's like planting an orange tree. That you're planting the tree, and it's going to take a little while to start bearing fruit. But when it does, it's going to bear fruit over and over and over.
Yeah. I'm so glad you said that, because there's this culture in some part of our industry, some parts, and whether it be a mindset in some of the agents or some of the trainers, which is, it's this high pressure sales script, fighting, battling them.
Yeah, they want to get people,
get them, and
they
if
want to
they
get
don't
people
buy in
converted.
30 days,
Yeah,
they don't buy in 30 days, you're fired, and move on. And what people don't realize, and this is, you really see it in farm areas, and I'm glad we're talking about this guy Tony in Scarborough. And for those people listening, Scarborough is just a part of Toronto. That the reason that the incumbent farm person is doing so well, and when everyone else tries to buy the same bench and the same sign and copy all that, is because they've been there for a long time, nurturing leads over a long period of time. And that listing they got today is someone that they actually met at an open house 3.5 years ago, but just kept in contact with.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's exactly.
So tell me more
right.
about the insights that you got from this.
Well, just that. I mean, certainly that we've done the same things on the buyer side, that realizing that the asset that you have is, I try and get people to move from an expense-based approach to lead generation and conversion to a capital investment approach to it. Most people are looking at lead generation as, when I say expense-based, I mean that I'm going to spend money on Zillow or on wherever generating leads, and I'm going to add up the amount of conversions that I had, that only 1 in 100 of them actually converted. I'm looking to spend the money, get the lead, get an appointment, get them in a house, and pay for the leads before the credit card bill comes, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the way people are looking at it as an expense-based approach. But when you look at it as a capital investment, you're investing in this bundle of people who inquired about real estate, and I'm taking a long-term approach to it, that portfolio, if I nurture relationship with everybody in a systematic way, that portfolio is going to yield buyers who are ready to buy right now throughout as it matures and ages, at all different times along the way. Some people are going to be ready in 90 days, some people in 6 months, some people in a year, some people in 18 months. But the longer that you are nurturing this and growing this snowball of leads that you have, the more valuable that portfolio asset becomes. And so I look at your ROI on the on that as a capital approach, that it's going to continue to yield.
Mm. Well, isn't it fascinating? Like, if they were, I love your perspective of this is an investment, and you're actually holding that investment to a return, right? And Tony seems to have gotten 11-to-1 return, but most agents I've found, and I'm sure, I've even heard you talk about this before, is that they'll start spending their money on a niche or into a geographic farm area or something, or maybe it's Facebook target ads, whatever, and they keep seeing that bill come in every month. To your earlier point, when I think the research you were showing was it was about almost 8 to 9 months where most people were quitting that, but the money was actually just starting to roll in right after that. Can you talk about that for a second?
Yeah, I look at it like, so, it took Tony he closed his first transaction in the 5th month, and that got him into what I call escape velocity, right? That was the point where he made a tremendous ROI on the money that he spent up to that point, because let's say the first transaction was $15,000 and maybe he had spent $5,000 up to that point. So he made a 3-to-1 ROI on the very first transaction that he did. But now from then on, it's self-funding. It's self-perpetuating, right? He gets all that money back, plus he got the extra money that he can reinvest in continuing it. So he only had to really put up the seed money of the first 5 months of mail. So maybe he spent the first $5,000 on that, you know?
Mm-hmm.
That's a way of thinking about it, that you take that long-term approach. And then as we showed, we would track everything. You know, I had a really cool infographic made that showed the whole thing. So we, along the bottom, we put the months from September 2013 to September 2017. And then above each month, we would put a red dot that showed the cumulative amount of money that he spent. So from 0 to 50,000 over the 4 years was the amount of spend. And then we showed above the months where he did transactions, we put a cumulative, line going up to the right that showed the first month he did 15,000 in that February, and then if he did another transaction the next month for 10,000, now he's up to 25,000, and then 2 months later another one for 15,000. His cumulative is $40,000. So we showed that whole thing all the way up to 543,000 over that 4-year period. And then from each of those green dots with where the transactions are, we drew a yellow line tracing it back to what month they first responded to the postcard, so where they first raised their hand. And in some cases, that was 3.5 years from the time they raised their hand till the time that they sold.
If people wanted to know more about that, is it on your podcast, your More Cheese and Less Whiskers, or is it?
Actually, I just started a brand new podcast, Glenn, called Listing Agent Lifestyle, and that's at listingagentlifestyle.com. I actually did a whole podcast with Tony where we went through that whole chart there. So yeah, it's on that.
Perfect. Well, I know what I'll be listening to this weekend.
All right.
That's great.